Hi, this is Ram from CrossMind Studio and welcome back to the 6th chapter of animated content creation series. In previous chapter we talked about the main subject of our series, which is the magic potion. We made a bottle, we prepared all the necessary things around it and also prepared a render just for the fun purpose. According to the schedule, today it was expected that we will be modeling the grass, ground and all that, but I wanted to discuss this part first, which is going to be modeling the skull object. A bit of a shuffling in the schedule, but don't worry about that too much. We'll get back to that part later. Now, why we are looking at this image on the screen is because today's chapter requires us to understand few things, which is what is normal map and what is sculpting in 3D world. Now, I'm sure at some point of time when you were getting into animation, you might have seen some incredibly detailed movies like Predator or Godzilla or some really high detailed creatures. Now, those of you who are coming from introduction series or like very new to 3D world, you might be having one question and most of you have these questions. If the polygons are so much of a limitation and you can't really animate the dense mesh, then how come we see all those creatures on the screen which have details of the pores of the skin? Understand the limitation of the polygons is not for the modeling purpose, it's for the animation purpose. You can model a 3D model with millions of polygons, but you can't animate it. For a final animation purpose, we need the best of the both worlds. We need a low polygon mesh which we can animate with the bones and rigs, and we need a high resolution mesh which we can use for the rendering purpose. So we translate that high resolution information with the normal maps and displacement onto the low resolution mesh which can perform animation. Now, to clear out this concept, I have these two models on the screen. Now these two pretty much look identical in terms of details. You can see these both models have wrinkles, skin details, and it doesn't really look like a low polygon model. Now what's the difference in these two? The difference is the mesh on the left. If we go to the solid mode, this one only have 2000 polygons and I can edit it, animate it without having to worry about the performance. But this one on the right, I'll make a copy of this and apply modifier, whatever I have. Now this one on the right, if I try to go to the edit mode of this and try to make any adjustment or make any transformations or try to animate it, it's not going to be practical and it's not going to work because so you'll have performance issue and heavy dense meshes are not meant for it. This is not practical. So basically in the entertainment industry, mostly there are two kind of models. One is prepared for the visual detailing purpose, which is something like this on the right. And one is a mesh, which is for the animation purpose. And then all the details from this one are transferred onto this model, but not with the polygons. But those details are transferred with the texture maps, like normal maps, displacement maps, and bump maps. All right. And just to clear out this concept, what I'll do is I'll enable the render and I just want to show you what normals mean. Now, when we render something, all the faces of the models are drawn into XYZ according to the direction they are facing. So when you go to the edit mode, if I select, so each of these faces have normals and they are facing in their own direction. And I'll just bring a geometry node over here and try to visualize the normal, and same for this one. So all these faces are drawn how they are aligned with the world. You can see all these Z axis is the blue, X axis is the red, Y axis in the green. So you can see whatever is facing the X is the green, whatever is facing the Z is the blue, whatever is facing in the red is the red, and wherever they blend together they make the third color. Over here this looks flat, and over here, since this model have 2 million polygons, because of all those details we see detailed normal map. So this color information from this one, this red, green and blue information of the normal map, we can translate to this model. Now if I select this model over here on the left and enable the shader that I have, you'll see I already have a normal map assigned to this one. And this normal map, which you see on the screen over here, was transferred from this model to this model. All right. And this is why when we render these two, they both look pretty much same. If I disconnect this normal map that we see over here, it's nothing but a flat model. I hope the concept is clear. And keep in mind, this is not bump map. All right. Like I usually used to think that these two are pretty much same. But bump map is not three-dimensional information. It's just a 2D map with the ups and downs. It doesn't have three-axis information. So as you can see, if I use it as a bump map, it doesn't really look great. So normal map is the thing that we are going for today. So don't worry about it. We'll understand this once we actually make our own model of the skull geometry that you've seen in the trailer. So before we start the main part of this tutorial, I want to discuss a few things about sculpting. Now about the sculpting, I'm sure most of you have heard this word before, and in the digital world, 3D sculpting is very popular. There are two reasons behind using sculpting. One, it gives you like a traditional kind of control. So instead of really extruding vertices or polygons or trying to form everything, you basically get brushes, and with the brushes you can paint on your high resolution mesh. And I'll just try to give you a few examples first, and then we'll go to the overview of sculpting. So this one is the high resolution, and if I go to the sculpt mode, in the sculpt mode, you'll see we no longer have the extrude, bevel, all those commands. And these are all brushes. And now if I try to sculpt it, so over here I have already loaded a texture for the demonstration purpose. So instead of transforming polygons, we are painting details on a 3D mesh. So if I drag something over here, let's say like if I want some skin texture over here, so you can see this skin texture. This is 3D geometry. Polygons are moving in and out, and this is not just a texture. So if I increase the strength of it, it's like a displacement. I can sculpt any details. All this you are seeing on the screen just for the demonstration purpose. However bad it is in the quality, I have painted with these brushes. So once you have your high resolution model, you can use any kind of brushes. These brushes are just the images, all right, like alpha maps, like brushes you use in the Photoshop or Krita. Similarly, you can bring any grayscale information. You can actually go and shoot an image of a tree and make an alpha out of it. You can paint the tree bark over here. All those gray values, just like how we work with the displacement modifier, they will project it over here. It will work like a brush. And now I can take some other, like a clay thumb brush over here. Over here I have multi-plane scrape brush. So every brush have different behavior, different purpose. You will have to paint with every brush to understand what they are meant for. Okay, it's going to take some time. All right, and I'll give you an overview in a moment, but this is basically what sculpting is meant for. You have more artistic control, no longer dealing with the polygons. You initially prepare a base mesh like this one with the polygons and all that, and when you're done with that, then you get into sculpt mode, and then you start painting all those finer details with the textures and brushes, and then after that you can basically transfer it. I'll go to a new file. So let's talk about sculpting a bit before we proceed further, and this is not going to be a very dedicated detailed chapter about sculpting, but this would be just enough so that we can get today's work done, and also to introduce you to the sculpting part, which we haven't done on this channel so far. So we have a default cube over here. Now when we press Ctrl tab, we get several options over here, like, or even from here. So there are different modes, and just like how we dealt with the texture paint, vertex paint and all that, there is another one which is called sculpt mode. So once you go to the sculpt mode, on the left you can see all those tools have changed into brushes. That is replaced with the sculpt interface. There are several kind of brushes, and you will find your combination, the best one that works for you once you practice or fiddle around with these a little. So on the top we have interface which lets us adjust the radius of the brush, strength and stroke type. You can load a texture into brush just like demonstrated earlier on the Suzanne head. And over here in the active tool properties, you'll see an interface which is quite similar to the texture painting interface that we had discussed in the introduction series of the Blender. So we are in sculpt mode, and now when I draw something over here, nothing much happens. That is because we don't have enough resolution for this brush to perform a stroke. Now there are two ways. One is the Dynatopo, which is for a dynamic topology, and one is the multi-resolution. So I'll explain both and then we'll talk about more about this. So in the dynamic topo, as the name suggests, when you enable this one, wherever you draw a stroke, it's going to add subdivisions over there and subdivide your mesh. Like wherever the mesh is needed according to the brush, it's going to add the mesh dynamically. And in the dynamic topo, you have the detail size. If you decrease this, don't decrease this too much. It might would hang or crash. So now you can see when I decrease the detail size, we have a much finer looking stroke. I mean a much finer looking details going on compared to this one. And if I decrease this even further to 2, it's going to give me a much more dense mesh. So this is one of the way. The other way is adding the multi-resolution modifier, and you'll find the different use case scenarios for both. But for those who are beginning with the sculpting, I would suggest you begin with the multi-resolution modifier. But you can play around with both. Okay, so you'll find use for both the methods once you understand the concepts for both. I'll bring a Suzanne head over here. Now the multi-resolution modifier gives you basically subdivides your mesh so you can sculpt on it. So you might would think that then what is the difference between subdivision surface and all? So if you apply subdivision surface and you go to the edit mode, you're still dealing with a low resolution mesh unless you apply the subdivision. Or let's say if you go to sculpt mode, you still can't get the detail. That's because the subdivision it won't let you tweak the high resolution mesh. Let's say if we are in 3 subdivision, now if I try to perform a brush, it's not going to work because it's still taking that low resolution geometry in consideration. But if we apply the subdivision, the multi-resolution, and we subdivide this mesh a few times, now you'll see when we are in sculpt mode, we are able to sculpt on this. But when we go back to the object mode, we are back to the low resolution mesh. My knowledge about multi-resolution is very limited, but as far as I know, it's specifically made for the sculpting purpose. It performs better. It lets you sculpt detail in high resolution while keeping your geometry, the base resolution lower, so that your scene doesn't get heavy. And also you can work on a multiple subdivision levels, and it's going to preserve all that detail. Let's say if we subdivide this a five times, and if I make some dots over here. Now if I go back to the object mode, and if I select these and move these up, now let's go to a sculpt mode. You'll see all that information is still preserved in the high resolution. You'll understand all these when you are actually into sculpting, but for now let's just deal with the basics. And one more thing you would want to keep in mind is, so you basically start with a low resolution mesh. Let's say if we have one Suzanne head over here. So when you apply multi-resolution, in the starting, I would suggest that you don't go to the higher subdivision. Just start with a resolution of 1 and get the initial shape right. On the subdivision 1, you can just get on this subdivision, you can focus on the volume of your base mesh. And once you are happy with the volume, then if you want to add some a bit more details, then you can subdivide it. So subdivide this further, and on this level you can add more details, like if there are like any wrinkles or something like this. I mean, if there's like a cheekbones or bone structure. So depending on the requirement of the mesh, you can subdivide this. So don't just make it high resolution just because you can. So if the need occurs, then you do this. Now after that, if you need to add some really finer details, then you can subdivide this one more time, and on this level you can add some more details over here. And after that, if you really need to get into the levels of the skin detail, then you can subdivide this a few more times, and I think going beyond 5 or 6 is not going to work. I think 6 is the max you need. Now on this level you can start working on the finer details, make the brush smaller, or in fact you can load one texture, and this texture you can load from here, yeah, and change the stroke type to anchored and stroke anchored. So this way you can plan your mesh and work with the subdivisions. I'd suggest that you start with the very basics, and it's going to take you some time to understand how this works and getting used to the interface and understanding the brushes. I don't think you'll be using all of them, but I'll just give you an overview of what you need to get started with. So there are a few hotkeys that you might would want to remember. So in the sculpt mode, these brackets you can use for increasing or decreasing the size of the brush, just like Photoshop. If you want to draw a layer like a clay strip kind of thing, then you can press L and this will add a layer, and over here you can see the layer brush is selected. If you press X is going to give you draw brush, simple draw, and right now my texture is loaded on this one, that's why it's not working well. So yeah, this is the by default what you get in the draw brush. So L is the layered and X is for draw. And just in case if you want to work on some specific area and mask something out, you can simply press M, and let's say with the M you can enable the masking. So when you press M, this is going to enable the mask mode, and over here you can mask some areas. And once you have masked these, you can simply press Ctrl I to invert your selection, and after that when you press X or take any brush to deform the mesh, it's going to work only on those areas which are not masked. So right now our entire mesh is masked because we inverted the selection. Now if you want to remove the mask, you can press Alt M on the keyboard. These are the good enough for you to start with. And when you draw a stroke with the left mouse click, it basically pulls your surface out, or depending on the mesh, the defaults of the brush. So if you want to invert that effect, you can press Control, and this is going to work in the invert direction. So instead of pulling the mesh out, it's going to push it inside. A few days ago I posted on the social media that I was recording this chapter and I was waiting for the right time, but my graphic tablet stopped working. My Wacom Cintiq display stopped working. Otherwise I could have shown you a few interesting things which you can do with a graphic tablet. But just to give you a hint, the graphic tablet pressure sensitivity, if you are aware of it, it works on the sculpting mode as well. Over here, this button, it calls strength pressure. So if you're using a graphic tablet, it's going to work according to the pressure. Whenever you press harder or with the tilt angle, it's going to, instead of a flat stroke, it's going to give you a natural pen kind of a stroke. If you have any rough surfaces, if you want to smooth things out, then you can simply press Shift and it's going to smooth things out a bit. I would suggest that you go through these brushes one by one and see their effect, because explaining these brushes is not really going to add any value to this chapter, because these are very self-explanatory and these are like kind of textures of the brushes that you can only understand when you use these. For instance, like a crease brush, it's basically going to give you crease, like a very sharp line, and the fill brush is basically going to add into the holes, and the flatten brush is going to flatten the surfaces. So if you're modeling something like a hard surface, so over here you can see it flattens the surface. Every brush's settings are different, so I'm not going to drag this much further because like I said, it's not a sculpting dedicated chapter, which is like, it's not an introduction to sculpting. All right, we are going to start with the skull model, and for that I'll just go to the our project file. So I'm in a new file, and I'll just get rid of light and camera. I don't need this. So I'll go to the edit mode and press Ctrl B. So I'll press Ctrl B and give this cube some bevel and increase the number of loop cuts, subdivisions, whatever you want to call it. This way we'll have a sphere. And the reason for creating it this way is because when you bring a UV sphere from here, you'll see the geometry is not really well distributed, and over here we have a big clutter and all the triangles going on. But we don't want that, and this is a good start to create something which is equally subdivided and there are no triangles in this one. What we're going to do is basically we are going to create a base mesh first. We'll create a low poly skull geometry with the sculpt mode, and after that, when we are certain about the shape and all, then we're going to use retopology and create a final mesh around it, and then after that we'll get into finer details within the sculpt mode, something like that. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is apply one sub multi-resolution modifier on this one. Let's also shade this smooth, and keep in mind I'm using right click select. So just in case if you guys get confused, I prefer right click selection. I'll subdivide this with a multi-resolution, and that way we should have a much more mesh. Control tab, go to the sculpt mode. So in the sculpt mode, our X symmetry is enabled. So I'll go to the front view. So first thing we are going to do is just get the basic shape right. Actually, let's go to the object mode, scale this down, something like this. I just want to get the skull shape right. So in case if you want to study the proportions and all, feel free to Google it or search it anywhere. Just write human head proportions or the skull proportion. You will have a better start instead of making random shapes. Now this is the top part of the skull, and what we would do is create eye socket somewhere over here, nose over here, and this should go something like this. This is how it's going to look like. I'll just hide this annotation. So in the sculpt mode, I'll press G so that we have grab brush, and with the grab brush selected, we are going to give it some shape like just like a skull. So I just want to get the initial form, the volume right before getting into the intricate details. So keep some sort of reference in front of you, and there are plenty on the internet, on the Pinterest. I don't think you'll have any difficulty finding the reference for a skull. I'll press X to activate the draw brush. Somewhere over here, we're going to just create sort of like sockets for the eyes, the eye sockets. With the grab brush, we are going to pull this inside. I'm just going to switch brushes so you guys can, I hope you guys can follow along. It's not too fast. We are just slowly going to try to shape it like the skull. So there should be some, yeah, something like this over here, and we want to make it hollow. So whenever I need to create invert shapes, I mean like push things inside, I'm using Control key and painting, and I'll press M and mark few areas over here. Just some rough shapes. Control I to invert this and push these out maybe, and with Alt M we can clear the selection. So I'll put few references for you guys in case if you're having hard time finding something good. So I'll put them in the description. So you can see slowly it's starting to shape like skull. Alright, so it's going to take you some time if you're sculpting for the first time. So don't worry if it's not looking great at this moment, but the goal should be to get comfortable with these modeling methods. And I think I can subdivide this one more time. Now let's go to the sculpt mode. Slowly start sculpting the details. Keep viewing things from different angles. So take a slow approach and slowly scrape things up, move things around. I'll decrease the strength. So my knowledge about the anatomy might won't be like too accurate. So I'm not really a great artist in terms of anatomy of human. I'm just doing some improvisation, and I have few references in front of me. So it should be good enough for my purpose, and I'll make sure I make it look decent and not too bad. Sorry about the screencast. Yeah, I think more or less we have a good shape for the start, and a few things needs some more work. So I'll just stop talking and just work on it so you guys can observe. So in case if you're coming from ZBrush, or if you have seen some like those fancy materials for sculpting, if you're wondering, those you can set from here in the viewport shading options. You can click on the matte cap, and these materials give you much more better preview for the surfaces. You can see all the curvatures much better. This will help you a bit with the sculpting. So I really hope I had my stylus working. I'm having a bit of a hard time working with the mouse, and I have been using the stylus for quite a long time, and I was already so behind the schedule. I didn't want to postpone it, and haven't really heard from the Wacom services so far. I hope I'm not going too slow. So I just want to make one more backup of this. So this is what we started with, and we have reached so far over here. Let's subdivide this one more time, and so we can sculpt a bit more surfaces. I can press M and draw some stroke over here. Sorry, just one line. Invert the selection and just pull this out a bit. Okay, so the teeth, I don't really want it to be so perfectly aligned, because these are very worn off surfaces. It should be distorted. So first I want to, yeah, something like this, and this area we can make it more hollow. Okay, I kind of like this shape. I want to save it into one more backup. Yeah, so in the sculpt mode, I just want to disable, I just want to mask few areas over here, and just few random strokes, and pull these out, like make it a rough line instead of a fine line, which is actually like teeth. I don't want it to look like that. And you can disable the symmetry. Yeah, something like this. Yeah, so with the symmetry disabled, we can make few more changes so that it doesn't look so symmetrical. I don't really like symmetrical surfaces when it comes to human or any anatomical things. Sorry. So with the layer brush, I'll L for the layer brush, I'll just draw a few strokes over here and make this area more prominent. And over here we need some sort of some prominent line. Yeah, something like this. So yeah, that's it. And now what we can do is, because we have the base mesh working fine, what we need to do is we need to make a retopo of this. Now if you go to the wire mesh, and this wire mesh is like not really a great topology for this kind of mesh. Now we can actually skip this part. I mean, because we are not going to animate this mesh, and this is not really meant for rigging, which we are going to animate. So we can skip the retopology part, but I wanted to include it in this session so that you have a bit of an overview. However, on the basic level, what is the flow of preparing an asset from the base mesh, retopology, sculpting, and finishing it off. All right, so I don't want to break that process. Feel free to skip it if you want, if you're already familiar with it. Now for the retopology, what we can do is, first of all, we are going to lock this one down. We are going to create a low resolution mesh on top of this, which have a better topology. And then we are going to make the final details in the sculpt mode on that final mesh. All right. So now to create the final mesh on this one, we need to retopo this, and first make sure we lock this one down. And if you don't see these options, you can always find these from the filters over here. We have the final base mesh, and now we need to create a good model with a good topology on this one. So let's create a plane, because plane is a good point to start. And let's rotate this one into 90 degree. In the snap, go to the faces, just enable the project individual elements, and after that you can just bring this one over here, scale this down. And now if you go to the edit mode, what will happen is when you move these points around, these will snap on top of the surface which is behind it. All right, now what we need to do is we need this mesh, whatever we create from this. Let's say if I create extrusion out of this, we need this mesh to wrap around the base mesh, this one. So we can apply a shrink wrap modifier on this one, choose this one as a target, and then we can adjust the offset. Choose first enable the selection so that we can choose this target. And after this you can on surface outside, so make sure this is set to outside. We want this to stay on top of it. And after that you can just give it slight offset, like 0.01 is good enough. We can revert this later. So now whatever you will create, if you go to the edit mode, so when we go to the edit mode now, it kind of goes back to the original mesh, and it doesn't show us the final effect of the modifier. So for that you need to enable this one, and it says on cage. So this way we'll see the final effect, which is after the modifier. All right, just like what we discussed in the beginners series, we can just extrude mesh with the create new faces or new vertices with a control click. So I'll trace this up. And one more thing, we can also apply one mirror modifier. And before that, I'll just make sure the cursor, Shift S, cursor is set to the world origin. And after that we can set the origin of this object to 3D cursor. And now when we apply the symmetry or the mirror modifier, so we have this working on the both sides. You can just extrude multiple faces if you want, and then after that you can align these. And there are few plugins or add-ons that might help you guys with the retopology. And if you're dealing with this on the regular basis, then there are few good ones. You can check out the Blender market for that one. So in the mirror modifier you can enable the clipping, so that ways we don't intersect these two parts. All right, 0.1, 0.2. I also want to change the color of these objects so we can see things more clearly. Now just trace it out. About the topology, just try to do some research about it. So the easiest way to think about this, think about the muscles of the human or whichever creature you are dealing with. So the muscle of the flow of the muscles is a good way to think about the topology of the mesh. So we want the deformation of the meshes to happen in the way it happens on the human skin, like with the muscles. You can think of it like that. I think I can add one more loop over here. Yeah. So this one we can connect like this, and let's press F to bridge this. Sorry, just move it inside. You can fill this patch with the F, and we can with the control click you can just now I'll just merge this. Press M to merge at last. We'll close this one later. We need to create a polygon out of this, so don't worry about it at this moment. So we have this main flow around the eye sockets. Now what we can do is just select this entire loop, create one extrude out of this, and scale this down, and now just snap it to the surface underneath it, and this will continue in this direction somewhere over here, and this will go till the back. All right, and this will continue in this direction and go on the top like this, and this will meet the other side like this. Alright, so this one is connected, and now our skull looks like Bane. Now I'll just enable the poly build tool, and with the control click I can just quickly drag these faces from the corners. So with the poly build tool what you can do is if you bring it close to the edge, it will extrude that edge, extend it. And if you hold the control and bring it around the corner, it will create a polygon out of it. If you hold it along the edge, like any edge which is not really a corner, then it will create a triangle. Then from that triangle you can like let's say if I drag a triangle from this one, then I can drag again to make it the entire polygon. Alright, I just drag from the corners and create the polygons. It's quicker this way. And in the sculpt mode, I'll just press shift and smooth things out a bit. I think I can bridge these two with the F and add few loop cuts over here. And I also think I can connect these two and add few loop cuts over here, few loop cuts over here. I think we can move this up over here, add one loop cut over here, and we'll connect this one over here. All right, so let's bring this one over here and press F. With the loop cuts we can fill these with the 3 cuts. Yeah, something like this. Now we need to just connect things together. Grid fill, and I guess just keep in mind the number of the loop cuts over here. So we have 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6. So that's code 1 2 3 over here, 1 2 3 4 over here. So I guess I can delete this face and connect this one to this one. So that way we have 4 over here, 4 over here, and then we can select the entire thing and grid fill. All right. So that's good. And then I'll go to the sculpt mode. With a shift click, I can smooth things out a bit. And now let's go to the edit mode again. And let's see if the grid fill works over here. So yeah, perfect. So grid fill works over here because we had even number of edges. So I hope you understand what is going on, and so we are basically creating a clean mesh on top of the sculpted mesh. Now if you look at the flow of the mesh for the both extra wireframe, yeah, you can see how this mesh have much more clear flow of the things. And even if I were to rig this one, I can do that. But this one, it has all the parallel lines and it's not really a great topology. So similarly, I'm going to trace out a bit more area. So I'm going to skip this section, and I hope you guys already understood what is going on. So I'll fill this area and then come back for this one. All right. Alright guys, so I think I'm pretty much done with the retopo, and all I did was just fill out the negative areas, and I also added few loop cuts to populate more dense mesh wherever I think would be needed. Like over here you can see the mesh is slightly more dense. So now if you see, if I select any loop, it's in the right formation. It's not a perfect, I could have spent a bit more time and could have done a better job. For a still objects purpose, I think this works pretty fine for me, and I don't want to spend more time on this, but I hope you get the concept. So basically what we are trying to do over here is, so this mesh over here, the one we created with the Sculpt, we're tracing that mesh with a new low polygon mesh which have a better flow of the loops. So instead of vertical and horizontal lines which were there in the previous this version, we wanted lines to be like how the muscles flow in the human face, and from here these to flow like this, and from here something like this. So that's what we've been trying to do. And now if I select this mesh, you can see somewhat I have achieved this kind of flow. And this might be too much for those who are doing this for the first time. This will take time, guys. So it's not going to be like a few hours job if you have never dealt with retopo and the sculpting. This overall workflow will take some time to understand and get used to. So don't worry about it if you don't get it right the first time or second time or the third time. And I realized over here I have made a pretty mid-resolution mesh. It's not really a low polygon mesh. One more thing what you can do is you can also start with a very chunky mesh, like instead of mid-resolution you can actually start with a very low polygon mesh just to understand the flow and later add the subdivisions. So yeah, and we are back to our final retopo mesh. What we can do is we can just take the edge slide tool and select all these loops and try to balance out the distribution. Like if you think some areas are way too tight and some areas are way too like spread out, then you can always balance it. And if you like, you can always just circle select some areas and you can smooth things out. And also very important thing, don't forget to select the non-manifold. So if you type select non-manifold in the search bar or in the select menu, you can find it. So what this will do is any loose vertices which are not really connected, it's going to select all that. So I can see something over here and something over here. So these things are going to create some problem. So we need to close these properly. So there is some weird face over here, and I'm not sure what this is. Yeah, so that one is gone. Over here there is some loose vertex. Yeah, this one. So we can delete edge. I think that's enough. So these edges, non-manifold, we are going to close anyways, so don't worry about these. Select all these open edges, the non-manifold. You can manually select it as well. These are not in one line, so I'm going to just scale these into x-axis. First I'm going to disable the modifiers. So over here you can see we have mirror modifier which is already disabled. Shrink wrap, we can apply shrink wrap. I'll just make a duplicate just for the backup purpose. Apply shrink wrap, and after that we are going to scale SX0. So we basically scaled everything in the X direction and made it value 0 so that everything is in one line. And now when we enable the mirror modifier, we just need to make sure that everything is properly closed, and now we can enable the merge and make sure the threshold is not too high and there are no unwanted faces which are welding. So this looks good, guys. I think I'm going to apply the mirror modifier. So I think we're good to go. Now if you see the final base mesh, so what we are going to do now is we are going to sculpt details on this version, add some more details on this one. Final base mesh, I'm going to hide that. I don't need that mesh anymore, and this is what we need. Now just like before, we are going to apply one multi-resolution modifier on this. So I'll just make a duplicate and move it to new collection 2. I just want to do a clean start, and now let's apply multi-resolution on this one. Let's subdivide it, maybe subdivide this one more time. Now we are going to do the same thing that we done before, add some details on this. So I'll just stop talking and you guys can observe for yourself. So now for the high resolution purpose, what we can do is subdivide the mesh one more time. And this is going to go really heavy. Now we have like really fine. 6 is the most I go for this, but 5 is like already really dense. That's because our base mesh was pretty high res. So I made a backup before doing that. So keep that in mind. So now in the sculpt mode, we are going to bring a new brush. And in this brush texture, load one texture. And this texture I brought from the Pixelogic ZBrush website, and I'll include this link in the description, so you can download these alpha maps, PSDs, and these textures you can just apply in any brush form. So feel free to explore any other resources if you find some exciting other brushes. So in the stroke, I'm going to change this one to anchored, and this way we are going to have an anchored stroke instead of the way we draw. Anchored in the stroke. In the texture, change this to stencil. So now we have stencil texture. So with the right click, you can move this texture. With the control right click, you can rotate this. With the shift right click, you can scale this. So I'm hoping this works with the right click, and it might be on the left click if your selection is on the left click. All right, so just try it out. So now that we have this one, and I don't think it's a really high resolution brush, I'll just give it a try. So once you have this, you can just click with the draw brush. If you click on I'll change the stroke to space, back to the space, and I just paint out few paint ups, and I just want to see how this is working. Yeah, this is definitely too much. I need to keep it subtle. just so that we can see the preview, I'm going to make a new window over here, and now let's decrease this to 0.2 or something. So keep in mind, right now this texture is loaded only on the draw brush. So if I change the brush, this texture will not work. If you want this texture to work with any other brush, in that case you'll have to load this texture into that brush. So for this one, let's say if I want the texture to work, then you'll have to select the texture again. So I'll paint few patches over here, and you can see the details on the surface. And I think I can find something. I'll just align this something like this. So now you can see, instead of a flat surface, our final render is going to have all these finer details. Pardon my throat, I have been having throat infections for quite some time now. My voice is it's hoarse, and I hope it's not too bad for this purpose. So I'll just stop talking, and I don't think there is anything to talk about this. I'll just align these patches and paint it. Overall, the base have a pretty good texture, and I don't want to overdo this. I just want to see if I can load some other texture which have sort of like scars or broken things, like broken faces. So I found another texture from the same website, the Pixologic website. So I just click on the new and load that one. It's this concrete PSD. In the sculpt mode, let's go to the sculpt mode, and in the texture, I'm going to change this to the one we loaded just now, the concrete. Basically, I want some of these scars to appear on this surface, but it's also taking the other texture which is along with this. So we don't want that. It was I increased the contrast, and I just wanted these lines. And this is a really low resolution texture, and I would suggest, if you can find some better resource. I didn't really look up much, so I just googled it very quickly. Just paint out some of these lines. Over here you can see the lines appear, and this one is working slightly better than previous one. So if you have a high resolution texture, so the details won't be pixelated like this. I would suggest that you get some better quality of texture. If you're like dealing with such a high resolution mesh and you're not able to leverage that resolution, then there's no point. So this is just to preview, like once we apply ambient occlusion on this one, how much details this one can have with the shadows and ambient occlusion and all that. So we are going to UV unwrap this model and transfer all these high resolution details to the low resolution version, which is going to be this one. Now, one thing you may have noticed is when we go back to the zero resolution, then this mesh looks different than what we have in the high resolution. Like all these changes in the mesh we have made, like over here and here, that is gone when we go back to the base resolution. What we can do is we can click on the apply base. This will change the mesh, base mesh, shape this according to the high resolution mesh. I'm just going to make a duplicate so you can see there is so much difference, and this one looks much better. So this one is our final mesh, and now you go back to the edit mode, and this is how it looks. And when you go back to the high resolution, this looks something like this. So now let's jump to the UV part and finish this off. Now for the UV, we are going to mark few seams first. So let's go to the edge mode, and we have the UV editor over here. First, for the eye sockets, let's select this one and this one, and Control E to mark seam. So this one is fine, and now we can find one seam over here somewhere. This one looks fine, and I'll mark this one as a seam as well. Now let's select this one, Control click till over here and mark this one seam. Similarly, I'll find this one over here on the other side, Control click over here, mark this one as seam. Now press U, select all the faces and press U and unwrap this. This will give you a pretty decent unwrap. Just for a visualization purpose, load one texture, which is the UV texture, and let's go to the shader editor and give this one image texture. So in the image, click new, call UV test, and make this one 2048 by 2048, and instead of blank, make it UV grid, and this will give you a UV grid. Connect this one into base color and enable the preview. So delete this preview in the UV editor. I don't want to see it there. So in the face mode, let's press L to select the entire island and make it 90 degree. I think we can mark this one as C. Select this island and rip this apart. If you move it outside in the face mode, this is going to rip it apart. So I'll just scale this up. In the UV editor, just click on the minimize stretch, and you can adjust the iteration from here. For some reason it's performing very slow. So the stretching is improved. I think it's better than before. Enable the proportionate editing and scale some of these areas with the proportionate editing, and it will just to improve some parts. So I'll leave it over here, and for this part I'll select the entire island and do the same thing. In the UV, minimize the stretch and press enter after a few iterations. So this was before, this is after. So I guess I need to manually adjust some iteration over here. Maybe not too much, only 250. All these areas look well distributed. Only the forehead part have some stretching. So we can maybe select these few polygons, and with the soft selection, scale these up, and that way we are able to reduce some stretching over here. With the relax brush over here, we can relax few areas and just decrease the strength. Wherever you see some clutter, you can relax few areas with the relax brush. More or less, I think for our purpose this is good. So what we'll do is we'll select these both islands and simply go to the UV, minimize stretch. And some of these areas we are going to adjust manually. In the face mode, let's select these two. I think we need to scale these up, scale these down a bit. Yeah, so let's move these over here, disable the proportional editing, scale these down. So we can place one over here, we can place one over here. So this is not a perfect UV. I think you can minimize the stretch a bit more. And let's see, we can minimize the stretch for this one. Since there won't be much focus over here, I don't want to spend too much time or the resolution on this one. So let's make it tiny and place it over here. So this looks fine. I think we can start working on the material now. Alright guys, so I think we have pretty decent UV layout for our purpose, and feel free to work more on this if you see any stretching happening anywhere or explore other layouts. I think we can start working on the shader now. We have pretty much everything ready. So let's go to the shader editor and bring a standard principled BSDF. Before we work on the shader, first we are going to bring one image texture, and into that image texture we are going to bake the normal maps. So click on the image texture, click on the new, and let's call this one skull normal map. I'm going to make it 4K so that we have good details in the close-up shot, and 32-bit float. And you have this blank slot of the image texture in which there is nothing as of now, and we are going to bake normal map into this one. But before we do that, into color space, make sure you select the non-color data. Otherwise it's going to give you some errors wherever the seams are. So we don't want any color information. This is a non-color data, the normal maps. So select this. For the normal baking, you must need to select the non-color data. The baking process works only in the cycles. So in the EV, we are not going to be able to or transfer the textures. So go to the cycles render, and if you scroll down, you'll see this bake button over here. So by default, you'll see this interface. And this is in case if there are two models, let's say one is the high resolution and one is the low resolution. So if you're coming from external softwares, you sometimes, let's say if you have a 3D scanned object or a 3D sculpted object from other software, in that case you will be making a low resolution one. And then what you can do is you can basically align both the objects and select the high resolution and then select the low resolution. Over here, enable the selected to active and click on the bake. So that's how it works when you dealing with the two models and when you transferring from one model to other model. And I don't want to go into details of this one. There are a few bit more steps to perfectly bake. Basically, you would need to make sure that none of the faces are overlapping. All that, we'll discuss that in some other chapter. But for today's need, we are only going to need this model, the low resolution one, which we have. Because we have all the high resolution details on this model itself with the multi-res modifier, so we don't need two models for this one. Now let's go to this bake window in the render properties and enable the bake from multi-res. As soon as you do that, all that other options like selected to active, all that is going to disappear, because this is a much more simple workflow. Make sure your normal map slot is selected in case you are baking the normal maps. So whichever texture let's say if you're baking the displacement and you have the displacement map somewhere else, then you will need to make sure that that slot, that texture is selected. So whichever is the selected one, it's going to bake the information on that texture. So just be aware of that. Enable bake from multi-res, normal map, non-color data, check. And once you're sure of it, everything is set, just click on the bake. And depending on the configuration and the resolution of the model and the resolution of the image, it's going to decide the time that is needed for it. And as soon as it's done, you will be able to see the image editor and skull normal. So you can see our normal map over here. All that information from the high resolution one is now transferred into a texture. All right. And also one important thing to keep in mind is before you bake the texture, just make sure it's not connected into any material. Otherwise it's going to give you some error. And just make sure it's not connected anywhere. Yeah, I think we are good to go. And just make sure to save this one, normal map. Let's save it over here. So our normal map is done. Let's enable the render. Let's enable the HDR. So HDR is going to give me a pretty soft lighting, and for preview purpose I'm going to bring simple light over here. So let's bring area light, something like this. Yeah, this works well. Okay, so before the shading process, I hope you are aware we all use Node Wrangler. I don't know why Blender doesn't keep it for default, so just enable this one. Okay, so now let's bring one normal map and plug this one into the normals, and the texture that we have just baked, just connect this one into the color data over here. As soon as we do that, you will be able to see all that sculpted information into the low resolution model. So let's increase the preview to 1. If you want, you can delete the multi-resolution after the baking is done, and you can just bring the subdivision surface. So I'm just going to keep it just in case if I need to rebake anything later. Now the fun part about this one is, even if I collapse the geometry with the decimate, and doesn't matter how many polygons are there now, it's still going to keep the normal information. Like, this is just for the beginners. So if you remember, if you played the old games like Lara Croft games from the 90s and 2000, it's very common in the video games. So you have very low resolution model, but once you render that out, you can still see some good high resolution details which were baked with a normal map. So that's the fun part about this one. If you are dealing with a very low configuration and if you want to speed up your renders, you can always decimate your model and just to increase your performance. I'm not going to keep that. I'll just deal with the high resolution one. Now let's bring few procedural textures. Now let's create some textures for the base color. And right now it looks too flat. And to do that, I'll just disable the normals as of now. Let's shrink this window so that we have more space and you guys can see what's going on. I'm going to bring one texture and wave texture. Sorry, I'll just type wave over here. And into this one, make it bands. Let's control shift click this one to preview and change the axis to Z. Decrease the scale, something around 1.1. Increase the distortions and increase the distortions to something really high. Yeah, 30 is good. And we can also increase the details, 4.5 and something like this. So we are going to combine a few textures, like one is this one, and into this I'll add another texture. Let's just add another wave texture and plug this one into the vector. And we are just going to break that texture into much more distorted texture. So I'll change the bands to rings and change sign to saw and decrease this to very low value. Something like this. Increase the distortions. Change the detail space. I mean, these values it took me some time to explore the kind of look I need. So basically, overall, what I'm going for is one large scale texture, which gives me big patches, and then a finer texture, which gives me like small patches. And then we are going to combine both the textures to create some overall organic, rough procedural texture. I'm just playing with the distortions and okay. So we have the large patches, and now we are going to create another texture, which is going to be the wave texture itself. Let's add another texture. Make this one bands. I'll just control shift click so that we can see the preview. And into this one, I'll change this to Z as well. Keep it saw. So these are the values I used. You guys can explore a different kind of look if you want. Basically, I want some finer grains into this texture and something like what you see on the ground. And into this, we can add another wave texture similar to this one. Just play with the different settings over here so that we have some really fine looking grains. So So now as you can see, we have one bigger patches and then we have other texture with the smaller patches. So that's good. And we are going to give it some colors later, so don't worry about that. You can minimize the textures if you need to with the H is for hide. You can toggle that just to organize. Let's bring a frame. Just drag it, just drag your nodes into a frame. So we have two different textures, and now let's bring some colors to these ones. So let's add one color ramp, converter, color ramp, and make a duplicate of this. So first one is going to be this one, and in this I'll give some like a muddy brown color. This one we can keep a slightly brighter. And then we are going to bring one mix RGB and combine both of these with an overlay so that we have both the textures mixed into one. So bring overlay and increase the factor all the way to 1. And now we can connect this one into base color. And let's enable our normal map again. Yeah, this is fine. So right now this texture looks kind of flat. I mean, it doesn't have any ambient occlusion. So for that, we can just bring one ambient occlusion over here. Multiply this one with the ambient occlusion. So if you control click over here, you can see the ambient occlusion details, and we can always tweak these values with color ramp and enable the only inside. We only want ambient occlusion to happen inside the model and not affect the other objects which are closer to it. So we want some really darker values in the eyes and the nose socket so that it gives you really deep sense within the model. Sorry. So this one was without the ambient occlusion. If you increase it all the way, you can see these eye sockets and all. Now like we have really darker values over here. I think I can bring some more light in the back just for the preview purpose. Yeah, so this is good. And maybe a fill light. Yeah. Now let's bring one geometry node from here, the input geometry. Now we are going to use the pointiness which is over here and use these to whatever the cavities we have in the model, like all these curvatures. You can use that information with the pointiness. So I'll just bring one converter, color ramp. Instead we are going to bring the colors over here. We are going to multiply this further with the pointiness texture and change this one to something like this. Yeah, something like this. So we have the basic the base color ready. I think our overall material is pretty much done. We just need to assign some roughness maps so that these values don't look so flat in the specular. So let's tweak the material a bit. So we don't want these highlights to be all white. And now let's bring one image texture. Let's bring some just a ground one, any ground texture. So this one I downloaded from the texture heaven. So you can just bring any ground texture, literally. Like I just want to break the highlights which we see over here, and I don't want to use the same texture that we have created in the diffuse for the roughness, because like it's going to stick to the same shape and it's going to give us the same texture. So I want the scratches to look different from the base color texture. So this one, yeah, so this texture we are going to use into the roughness. So let's plug this one into roughness and bring one color ramp and just tighten these values a bit. So we just want a slightly more contrast, and the same color ramp we are going to use into clear coat roughness. So as of now, we are not using clear coat, but we would need to increase this one. So on top of the entire model, like we have the base specular going on, but on top of that, I want another layer of specular, like the coating. And for that, you can increase this one. And this will give you, like let me just bring the specular down so that you can see the effect. So this is this specular highlight you see, clear coat. Yeah. So it gives you like a very thin, like a plasticky layer on top of your surface. It's different from the specular that we have over here. So it's an additional layer and it's very useful for car paint materials and all that. So as you can see, we have specular going on and then additional highlights over here. And these highlights we are going to break with the clear coat roughness. And actually I'm going to use another, sorry, let me just hide these and clear these out a bit. Sorry, my bad. We need to connect this one to clear coat roughness. And let's bring one color ramp over here as well. And I'll just invert these values like this. So right now for beginners, it might would look too much like what's going on. So basically we are going for a very rough look. And if you see some ancient ruins or like a catacombs, we are going for very dirty look on this one. So we want this model to look very rough, very worn off. It should have like many scratches as much as possible. So that's what I'm trying to do over here. So for the base color, I have combined two different kind of textures, procedural textures of the wave, and given these colors and multiplied these colors. So, and once we have that texture, we have given it some ambient occlusion and also used some pointiness from here to break these flat values of the texture with this one. Into the normals, we have all that information from the high resolution sculpt, and into the clear coat highlights, we have these the same texture with the inverted values from the texture heaven. Any ground texture would work over here. So that's the overall shader. It's very basic once you understand it. I'm just trying to clarify to the beginners. Whoever have a bit of experience in the Blender, they won't have any difficulty following this shader. So the shader is done. There is only one thing I would like to tweak about this is the base color which we have is kind of a similar, it's the same color going around everywhere. So for these areas which are around the eyes and cheekbones, so basically this rim, I want to highlight this part a bit more. I want this part to stand out in the dark environments. So for that we can simply copy the multiply node one more time, and in the factor just plug the same values of the pointiness, and we are going to bring actually we can duplicate it from here. So we are going to use this pointiness value, a very high contrast value, which gives us a good highlights around these areas where we looking for, where we need. And now after that we can basically bring one either brightness contrast or RGB color, anyone you prefer. We only want to bump these values up and just want to make it brighter. So we have one original color, and then second version is the brighter one that we combine with the pointiness. Sorry, change this to mix. Yeah. So the base color have now these brighter, a bit more warmth effect around the edges. So this is good, and now we should have a much better result. Yeah, so around the nose and eye sockets we have much brighter values, and that's about it. So that's about it for the skull. Now what we can do is, there are two things. We can actually jump on to the next chapter, or we can stay here and play around with this a bit more and create some little nice fun scene around it. So what you've seen in the trailer, so that's what we are going to do. So keep in mind, this asset is for the main scene that you've seen in the series trailer. Link is in the description. In the next chapter, we are going to combine this with the bottle and the grass and complete our scene. So that is a bigger scene. But for today's purpose, we are just going to create a slight small smoke simulation that you've seen in the trailer of this chapter. Bring a simple composition around it just so that you can create an exciting render out of it. So before we start with that, just make sure we have the cycles render enabled, and also the experimental feature is enabled, because we might be using some sort of displacement for the ground. We want to use experimental feature for that, because otherwise the displacement is not going to work. Let's bring a ground object, and we are going to bring one camera over here. So with the camera selected, press Ctrl Alt 0, and it's going to align the camera to your view. Let's make a good composition with this one, and I think we can increase the focal length to something really high. Yeah, something like this. So this composition looks fine. I'm going to keep it, and I'll just set a key on the camera just so that in case if I happen to move it or rotate this one, it can always come back to the original position. And over here, I'll bring one empty object. This we are going to use for the depth of field. So let's select the camera, and in the depth of field, select this empty. Let's enable the look dev mode. And for the ground, we are going to bring a simple principled BSDF. I'll just bring a very simple texture that I have downloaded from the texture heaven. I'll just bring one color information into the base color. Then let's bring some specular roughness map into rock ground roughness, and into the normals I'll load this one, and in the displacement we can load the displacement map that we have. But for this to work, we are going to need a displacement, color into height. So if we go to the cycles render now, you should be able to see displacement going on. But right now it's not actually creating a true displacement on the ground. First, let me just bring down the samples of the viewport render, because it kind of interrupts the voice, and I don't want the voice to break. Yeah, sorry for the voice interruption. I've tried many methods, but it always, the RTX voice creates a problem with the render. Yeah, so with the ground plane selected, make sure we have the experimental feature set enabled. And now let's go to the material, and into the material, if you come down to the settings over here in the displacement, instead of bump only, click on the displacement and also we need one more thing. We need more mesh into this one, and we can always bring one subdivision surface, and you need to click on the adaptive. Otherwise the displacement is not going to work. So there are three things that you need for displacement to work: experimental feature set, subdivision surface with adaptive, and in the material settings, displacement and bump enabled. But the problem is our plane is kind of becoming round once we enable that. So just subdivide the plane a few times, and this should be fine. Now once you enable the render, yeah, now we have the displacement on the ground. Only thing is, I'm going to just make it to a very subtle value. Sorry, not the mid, but yeah, the scale. Yeah, something like this. So that's all we need for the ground setup. I think I don't need this light in the bottom, and this light in the back, I can actually decrease the effect of this light. And in the environment, we are going to bring one shader volume scatter, and give this one 0.005 value, some sort of purple color, in any color that you prefer. So this is just so that we have some sort of volume effect going on in the environment. Now I think I can tweak the composition a bit more. So yeah, I think more or less our setup is done, and the only thing I feel is missing right now is the variation in the color. If I select the backlight, I think we can click on the use nodes and introduce some sort of blue color. In the front one, add some warm color, and also in the camera, I think we can bring some more depth of field. I think the f-stop value of 0.2 is going to work just fine for our purpose. So something like this. I kind of like the composition. There are some darker areas over here which I want to avoid. So in the texture, I'll just press Ctrl T and connect all these two vector. I just want to bring some different curve in the displacement over here, and to do that I'll just shift the texture. Yeah, something like this. This looks good. I think now we can work on the smoke simulation. So for the smoke simulation, it's going to be a pretty simple setup. What we need is some part of this original mesh to emit the smoke. And for that, what we can do is simply extract some of the faces from inside and outside of the object. So even though we will be rendering this scene in cycles, as you can see over here, other than smoke, I think you can make some really interesting stuff with the EV as well. This shader looks good with the EV render engine as well. So in case if you want to use real-time rendering, that is fine as well. But I don't think the smoke simulation is going to look as good as the cycles in the EV. So that's up to you guys to decide. So let's start with the smoke simulation setup. Okay, let's select the main final mesh and make a duplicate out of it. And in this duplicate, let's see, we don't want any modifiers on this one. So you can just apply this modifier. Let's select few of the faces from the inside of the eyes and the nose, like some faces which we won't be able to see in the render, which are like really deep. They don't look too obvious in the camera when they emit the smoke. So we don't want any of the frontal faces like over here to emit the smoke, and that's going to just look bad. And we want the smoke to emit from the inside of the skull. Select some faces over here and some in the back. Something like this, and we can delete the rest. Now this mesh is going to emit the smoke. If you're not aware of the fluid simulation at all, you can just check out the playlist section for the Mantaflow. It's on the channel page. If you are like not at all familiar with the smoke simulation, I would suggest that you watch that chapter first and come back to this one. First of all, I'm going to apply fluid physics on this one, and keep in mind I'm using Blender 2.91 for smoke simulation because there are some of the improvements and a lot of bugs have been fixed. So I thought I'll give it a try. So this version is 2.91 just for the smoke simulation. Previous one, you can use any of it. So on this mesh, I'll just say skull emitter smoke. On this mesh, I'll apply fluid physics and change this one to flow. This is set to smoke. Make it inflow. And this one, the main skull, we are going to change, apply fluid modifier on this one as well and change this to effector. And in the effector, make it collision and give it a very slight thickness. Alright. And the plane on the ground is going to be a collision effector as well. So give it some thickness. That's about it. I'll select the mesh emitter, this one, and go to the object, quick effect, quick smoke. So let's go to the camera. Yeah, select the camera. I just want to decrease the pass out. So this domain, I want to scale it down just enough so that it only covers the camera. I don't want it to be too large. We covered all of this in the basics of the Mantaflow, so just check that. It's going to be really helpful. I'll change the resolution to 64, and with the basic settings, just hit the simulation and see what's going on. Okay, before that, I'm going to enable the adaptive domain so that we get faster smoke simulation. So yeah, I can see smoke coming out of it, and it's just going to rise up, and it's going to have very boring motion at the start. So there are a few things we're going to tweak to make it exciting, so don't worry about that. First of all, instead of rising straight up, I want this smoke to have some initial velocity, and this initial velocity is to have like in the normal direction. So we are going to give it 4 into initial velocity, and we are also going to increase the density of the smoke. We want this to have some more density and a slightly thicker surface emission. We can increase a bit more so that there is more smoke. Now what this initial velocity will do is it's going to give it some sort of like a push in the normal direction. Sorry about that. So in the normal direction, it's going to push the smoke slightly out. And now let's select a domain. We can decrease the speed of the simulation. We want the smoke to rise very slowly. It should be a very slow animation. So I'll make it 0.5, and now let's do one test and see what's going on. So let's go back to the frame 1, replay the animation to see what's going on. And right now our cache type is set to replay so that we can see the preview when we do the playback. As you can see, now the smoke is pushing out in the normal direction. That's good. But right now what's happening is, because we don't have any texture on the emitter, there is equal amount of smoke coming out of everywhere, and that looks kind of boring. Let's bring one new texture in the emitter, enable the texture. Let's bring new texture and make it clouds and call this one emitter smoke clouds. And this one should give it some variation. So let's shuffle few numbers to reset the cache and go back to frame 0 and replay it again. I can see the smoke and everything is working fine, but I think we need to increase the resolution so that instead of such thicker plumes, we see some fine smoke. So what I'm going to do is increase the resolution and make another preview and see what's going on. I'll change the cache type to modular and bake the settings. I'm going to cancel only 62 frames I have, and just to see the preview of what's going on. So I think overall it's working fine. As you can see, there is smoke and it's much more finer now that we have more resolution to it. There are a few more things I want to do with this, and let's just free this cache. We want this to have much more flow into motion. For that, we are going to add some turbulent force field. Instead of just rising up, we want this smoke to have like flow in different directions. The direction of the flow should change, shift, and create some kind of a chaos in it. I'll bring a force field, and I'll change the animation to around 600 frames and make sure it's on 30 FPS. Alright, so at the start, we don't want much of the chaos, and for that I'll just add a location and rotation key for the turbulence. At around frame 350, we'll give it some rotation and add a key. So we have slight rotation going on. So this will change the pattern of the smoke, of the turbulent force. But after that, we want some more chaos in the smoke, and there should be a complete shift. For that, we can give it some motion from here till here and add some rotation to it. Alright, so this is the motion we have now, and it's going to add some good motion into the flow of the smoke. It won't look boring straight rising up. Instead, it will have multi-directional flow. The one thing before we bake it again, I just want to increase the size of the turbulent field, and this way, instead of having a very fine rough noise, it will have bigger waves in the smoke. So just like the introduction tutorial, just go back to the introduction of the Mantaflow series in case if you think this is too much for you. So all of this will start making sense if you know the basics. So the playlist is in the channel page, so feel free to check that and come back to this later. I think we are pretty much done. The only thing I want to do before we bake it further is scale down the domain so that we have more resolution for our smoke, and there shouldn't be any waste of resolution. Yeah, we want to pack as many voxels as possible into the frame, and we also want the smoke to dissolve after certain frames, like 45 should be enough. Bake the entire sequence and see what's going on. So I have around 150 frames. I just wanted to have a small set of preview before going for a large bake. So I like this animation. As you can see, the overall flow is, instead of just rising up, it's changing direction a bit, and it has a big waves. I'm sure when we do the entire bake, it will have a much more motion and the change in the direction, because the turbulence field have keyframes for the motion and rotation, the later frames. Let's do a final bake for this one. I'll just free this up. I don't want to use modular for the final bake. Sometimes there could be issues with this. Instead, I'll change this to all. Make sure the frames are set to 600. If you want to make a very small scene, go for it. If you want to only do a 5 seconds animation, just make it 250, 150, whatever you want. And also keep in mind, I changed the dissolve to 50. Earlier I had set this to 40. The smoke was kind of disappearing too fast, so I had to change this to 50. I forgot to mention is for the final bake, I enabled the noise. Before going for the final render, I enabled the noise. Just make sure you don't use any strength value, but only the upraise factor. Upraise factor 2, strength value 0. Leave everything to default, only make the strength to 0. I'll just hit the bake all button and come back with the final results. Alright guys, so the final bake is done and let's see how it looks like. So I kind of like the results, and as expected, the noise, the transformation in the turbulence field is creating a nice rotation in the smoke, and you can see over here, first it's flowing in the right direction, and then there is a twist, and then the flow changes towards the left and the bottom. From around 350 onwards, when where we had the animation key for the position of turbulence, you can see there is a drastic change. This is probably because of the shift in the position of turbulence field, and I really like it. I think this is good, and we are good to go for the final render. Now let's create a shader for this one. I'll select the smoke domain and bring one principled volume. Sorry, let's bring one material output and connect it into this one. Now let's see the preview and what's going on. So right now the density is too low. I think we need to increase this a lot. Yeah, I think we can use more density into this. We are going to copy this attribute, the density attribute, and paste it into the color attribute. And as soon as we do that, you'll see a drastic change into this. So based on the density, it's going to shade the volume over here. I'll change the color to something like a green color. Let me just bring some better frames so that we can see the preview better. So this frame looks good, around frame 299. I think this is good for preview. This is a very basic shader. I didn't use much into this. The only thing which I added just for the more drama, in the music you must have heard a few voices like in the background. So at around frame 300 or 350, I added another value into the emission shader. So what happens is, in the starting of the animation, we have the smoke going on, and in the later frames of the animation, some emission value triggers and it adds some glow into the smoke. I'll copy the density value and paste it into the density and use this into the emission strength. And now let's bring one math node and change this to power around 2.5. Sorry, power. And now let's multiply this one into, I'll make the density 0 for now so that we can see the emission shader better. So over here you can see these small flames. These are because of the emission shader. Now let's change this one to multiply. Sorry. Yeah. I'll also bring some color over here in the emission color. Yeah. Let's add another multiply over here and make it into 15. Yeah, something like this. On top of this, I'll add one gamma node, make it around 2. And now if we bring back our smoke, it's going to look like this. Now in the final render, what I did was I animated this value in the second multiply value. What I did was in the initial frames I made it 0, and at around frame 250 to 300 this value animates into, you know, like 2.5 or 3, like depending on your taste. You can increase this value and create a key. Simply press I onto this number and this will create a key. Like in the earlier frames we only have the smoke, and the smoke have a very slow motion and it's just flowing. And in the later frames when the music gets intense, in those frames I added some glow like this one. This merges into the smoke and it's kind of like a soul, it's kind of going with the theme name, which is Soul Stealer. So it's like there is some magical power which is like stealing the soul. I kind of like this effect. So this is what I'm going to use for the final render. So I think this glow is a bit too much. I can make it a bit subtle. Something like this, around 1 or 1.5. You can play around with these settings and see for yourself what the results are. If you want to add some more energy into this, the gamma is a good node for that. So yeah, that's about it, and this is the entire scene. And once you are done with everything, there are a few things you can use to speed up your render. First, you need to enable the denoising, and you can use the OpticX, it's a good one. And for the final samples I used 128. What you see in the trailer, I used 128 samples. And it's not actually production scale render or the production grade render. You can see in the render there is still some smudging going on, and that is because of the OpticX and the lower settings. I couldn't actually render it on the high resolution, so 128 is good enough, OpticX. And for the volumes I used 2-step renders for this purpose. In fact, I think you can go a bit further and make it 4, and this will speed up your volume renders. By default this value is set to 1, so this is all you need for rendering this. And it's a bit of a heavy scene. There is too much volume going on in the environment and in the smoke simulation. There is also displacement. It's going to take some time to render, but I think you're gonna love what you see. So that's about it. This is all what we need for today's purpose. Now I'm just going to render out this sequence, come back with the final results. I didn't take any passes or anything. I simply used PNG format, and I didn't actually render any passes. Just hit the render the sequence, and I'm going to show you the final results now. Alright guys, so here's the final render. I quite like this one. I think we are almost done. The only thing I'm going to do is do a bit of compositing. I just tweaked a little bit value in the exposure, color corrected this one a bit. That's about it. Here's the main render and here's the color corrected one. So nothing much. And like I said, I didn't render any passes, so this was a very basic setup. This was around 20 seconds animation, and from around 10 seconds onwards you can see the glow value starts to appear, and over here you can see some of those values slowly increasing and adding glow to our smoke simulation. So that's about it. This is everything. This concludes our chapter. So that's about it. And this concludes our chapter. This was a pretty long chapter, and there are a lot of things that needed to talk about, and we haven't discussed that in earlier chapters. Those of you who are new to smoke simulation, please go and watch the Mantaflow series first, and all of this is going to be really easy for you. You might won't even need to look for the smoke section in this tutorial. It's a very basic setup. Much more than this we have discussed already in the Mantaflow series. And for the rest of it, I think we are good to go for the next chapter. And in the next chapter we are going to assemble everything, the bottle, the skull, and place everything in the layout, and also work on the grass and the ground a bit and complete our scene. So for this we have used cycles render. I think you can use Eevee as well if you want to. Only thing is the smoke simulation, I'm not sure if you can render this well in the Eevee. So let's see. If you really want to try this with Eevee, just change the render engine to Eevee. In the volume you might have to tweak a few things. In the tile size, just decrease this one, samples 256, this will give you a slightly better preview. You can still see it's not looking as good as in the cycles. I'm not sure, I haven't really tried the smoke simulation ever in the Eevee. I'm not going to actually get into that. You can enable the volumetric shadows. So yeah, I think you can render this one. It's not going to look as good as the cycle render preview. If it's for pre-visualization purpose or just for the fun purpose, you can render this one into Eevee. And the ground plane, the displacement is not going to work. For that, you can just use the displacement modifier, which is over here, and use some texture. So that's about it for today's chapter, and we are done. The render is done, the scene is complete, and now we can move on to the next chapter. And we are going to assemble all the assets we have created so far into the layout which we had made in the fourth chapter. And if you have stumbled upon this chapter randomly, please go and check out the playlist section. It's this one is part of the animated content creation series which is going on. This one is the sixth chapter, and in the previous chapters we have covered a lot already. And in the future chapters we are going to talk about the lighting, dynamic animation, camera layout, and rendering process of it. So, and also there is another series which is about Mantaflow. Go and check that out, and do try out the Blender 2.91. It has a lot of improved version of Mantaflow, and there are many bugs which were fixed. Overall, it is in the better state than before. So do share your results with me on Instagram. Render out your sequence, render out a still image if you prefer that, and tag me with CrossMind on Instagram. Do share it with your friends, do share it with your colleagues. Support this channel. Let me know in the comments what you think about this chapter. If anything I missed into this one which could be corrected, please let me know in the comment. And I'll see you guys in the next chapter, which is probably going to be about explosion. I don't want to really commit at this moment, but I want to make explosion tutorial as soon as possible. A lot of you have been expecting it for very long, and I have been waiting for a stable Mantaflow release for explosion, and hopefully by the time 2.91 is launched, I will be able to post the explosion tutorials. So thank you guys, thank you for all your support. Work hard and just stay patient and try to understand this process. This one is a very important chapter. Do get it right, and I look forward to seeing your results. Goodbye, take care, bye.